I want to hear cannons. Downfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Those up with the head. Intercepted. 30. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25. 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And there the cannons go. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Hello and welcome back, Bucs fans, to a midweek edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast, live on YouTube today. I'm your host, Rhett Matthew, joined alongside me, my good buddy and co-host from BucsNation.com, Evan Wanish. It has been an eventful week for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but the biggest news we have for you today is a handful of injury updates along this Buccaneers defensive line. We'll talk about the trenches and then some, but let's dive right into it, Evan. So, Vita Vea, a massive piece along that interior defensive line for Tampa Bay, left week 2's game with an apparent leg injury, was immediately taken back to the locker room, did not return. Now, the Bucs defensive line, we talked a ton about how they were able to step up, play well, and ultimately take down the Lions. A lot of that was on the defense. But, I mean, no matter what way you shake it, Vita Vea potentially the biggest piece along that defensive line. We assume the worst. It didn't seem like good things were in motion by the end of that game. We heard what we heard. But it seems like after further test, it is only a grade 2 MCL sprain for Vita Vea. Todd Bowles spoke to the media this week, said that he is considered day-to-day. Now, we also mentioned that the Bucs are in no position to overlook any opponents they have on the schedule, right? You just beat a very good Lions team on the road. I don't think anybody on this team should think that they can easily beat the Broncos. Todd Bowles says Vita Vea is day-to-day. I'm going to be honest with you. Does he really need to play this week? It seems like, the best case scenario here and the group consensus among fans is to just give the big guy the week off. You think the Bucs potentially go that route?
Yeah, I do. I would personally be a little surprised if he did play this coming Sunday. I just feels a little bit early, and I mean it is good news that he's week to week, and especially since they haven't put him on IR, which again, just like the Anthony Winfield thing, they didn't put him on IR, which means they feel confident that Vita Vea will miss less than 4 weeks. So yeah, I do think the Bucs definitely dodged a bullet, but I also think they're going to want to be cautious with it. So I don't think they're going to want to rush him out there. And again, just like you said, they're in no position, and really nobody is, they're in no position to overlook an opponent, right? Because this Broncos team is bad. Like if you were to go out and lose to this team, well, a lot of the good graces that you just got beating Detroit kind of goes away a little bit, right? By losing to this team at home, it kind of goes away. It kind of dampers that just a little bit. So you're not really in a position to overlook an opponent, but if you're gonna choose a game for the guy to miss, this could be the one against an offense that is just not very good, having a rookie quarterback who's struggling right now, and I don't really know if they need to rush it. So, and I don't think they will. I think they're going to want Vita Vea because, look, it's a long season and we're only through 2 games right now. So they don't want to risk anything long term. Could he play? Sure. I mean, Todd Bowles didn't rule him out. Did not rule him out. Could have. He had an opportunity to, but he did not rule him out for Sunday's game. But we'll see with the injury report. The Bucs are off today. They practice Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So we'll see what comes of that. And we'll have some updates for you, come to the Friday show. You probably have a good idea on whether he's going to play or not come the game preview show. But I wouldn't expect it. But it also, it wouldn't shock me if he did, just because, again, the Buccaneers had a chance to sort of rule him out right there. And Bowles instead said, day-to-day.
Yeah, Bowles talked about it. Jason Light definitely talked about it with the Kancey injury, which we will dive into here in a minute. But there's not really a need to rush these guys back. You're coming off of a huge win. And keep in mind, it's early in the season. Like, not just early, like early. We're still in the first quarter of a 17-game season here. Bucs headed into week 3. A couple of big-time, victories here in the first 2 weeks for the Bucs. So you're 2-0. You're undefeated without Calijah Kancey on the field, and you're able to win the game without Vita Vea against Detroit. Now, a lot of other things had to happen, and that's not going to be able to happen that way every single week. But I agree with what you said, and I think the sentiment of the organization right now is not wanting to rush these guys back. Save them for the postseason at this point, right? I mean, that's what... That's really what you want out of a lot of your playmakers. You know, Kansas City kind of wrote the script about how to save your guys for later in the season. Travis Kelce has been a dumpster fire these first 2 weeks, but he's going to be making those third down conversions in the postseason, just like he has every year. So I think, you know, the Bucs are going to take the smart route with this, even if it means playing the waiting game, being patient with it. Now, we talk about this defensive line and we talk about the injuries. Let's cover the Calijah Kancey deal. Haven't had as significant of an update on Calijah Kancey, and there's a lot of question marks around what his injury is right now. So week 1, he tweaked and pulled a calf muscle, has not practiced since. Now, the weird thing about Kancey's injury, again, you know, he tweaks a calf muscle. It's a calf injury, something that he struggled with his rookie season as well, kind of caused him to miss part of that season. But Jason Light talked about this injury in particular and the effect that it has on a lot of players around the NFL. He said that a lot of guys are rushing back from calf pulls, muscle strains, things of that nature. They're rushing back too quickly and doing further damage, or winding up back on the injury report, or playing hurt. The problem with Calijah Kancey, we've heard that he's getting better. They're going to be careful about it, but I don't know if you've heard any other updates. The last thing I heard, Jenna Lane reported from ESPN that Calijah Kancey really doesn't even know what the source of the injury is. We know that he aggravated his calf, but we don't know exactly what caused it and exactly what's keeping it around, and I think that's kind of the scary part in all of this. The Bucs are going to want to be careful with him, but this is a young player early in the season. They definitely do not want to rush Kancey out there.
I think so. You know, when Jason Light's talking about that, you know, rushing back, I think he's alluding to Kancey himself, because they kind of did that last year. I remember, you know, this was a guy who did not participate in training camp or the preseason, yet was out there week 1 in Minnesota. And I remember even thinking, like, man, you know, they couldn't have given him a little bit more time. He ends up getting hurt and then has to miss a few more weeks. You know, I do think maybe they've sort of learned their lesson, and maybe they're being a little bit extra cautious because, yes, it is the same. Like, it's a calf injury. That's what he had last year as well. So I do think that they want to be careful with it. And really not ruin this guy's season. You know, you don't want to rush him back and, oh, he needs to play week 3. All of a sudden he gets hurt. Now he's out another, you know, month and a half. So I do think, you know, you don't want to rush it, but you are right. If that report's true, you know, from Jenna Lane, that, you know, he doesn't really know where it came from. It's sort of, you know, a lot of times they're like hamstrings, you know, they just kind of can pop up from time to time, I guess. It seems like a lot of stuff, you know, with like the legs, you know, sort of just pop up every now and then. You know, you don't know the exact injury. You don't know what's keeping it around. You just have to hope, you know, time heals all, right? You just have to hope that over time and the treatment that he's going to be getting, that he's able to rest up and heal up and be out there sooner rather than later. So, you know, I do think, I do think they are being cautious, maybe a little bit extra cautious, you know, maybe a little bit more cautious than they need to be, because they saw this story last year too. And I just think, you know, they want Calijah Kancey to be out there when he's 100%. They want Kancey to be out there and stay out there. So I don't think they want to risk any further damage there.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, you know, the Bucs are playing it smart by waiting things out. Again, it's early in the season. I don't want them to rush back a player like Calijah Kancey, or even, God forbid, a Vita Vea. I don't want to see that guy rush back against the Broncos to not be available against the Chiefs. You know, things like that I think are important. The Bucs definitely have a couple of tough games coming up on their schedule. This week may not be one of them. You want your guys to be ready. I think the way Greg Gaines was able to step up last week in that interior defensive line spot, I think he does it again this week. I think they will be okay, especially if you do not see Calijah Kancey or Vita Vea this week on the field out there for the Buccaneers. But I wanted to ask you before we talk about the offensive line here. There is a lot of chatter. There's even some chatter in our chat today about Haason Reddick, and we have covered Haason Reddick and the topic of him and the Bucs before on the show. So I think this question is less about Haason Reddick in particular and more so about the Bucs potentially looking for more help along the defensive line. I know going into the season, they were fairly confident with what they had. Week 1 and 2, you get a lot of injuries on the defense, some of them being on the defensive line. I am perfectly fine with playing the waiting game and not rushing these guys back. But in the meantime, they also have 2 sacks in 2 weeks here. So you're going to have to do something because JTS did step up, have a really good couple of weeks here in week 1 and 2. Yaya Diaby hasn't quite made as much noise, but expecting him to kind of get the ball rolling here soon. But outside of that, outside of Vita Vea and Calijah Kancey, being down both of those guys, I know they won the game last week, but it still feels like maybe there's something they can do with the money that they have left in their pocket here.
There is. I will say that I think maybe Yaya Diaby's a guy who maybe he's a guy that it takes him a little bit, right? Like last season, it wasn't really until there was a few games, right? It's not like he came out of the gate, on fire and this and that. As the season went on, he got better. So I do think, maybe that's the case. I mean, you'd like to see him, step up a couple, of times here throughout these last 2 games. He has another opportunity this week against the Broncos, who I Bleav Mike McGlinchey is actually going to miss this game. So Broncos are actually going to be down some offensive line help. So maybe they can take advantage of that. As far as adding someone else or adding someone from the outside, basically to come in and help, I don't foresee it right now. I think the Bucs want to see what it looks like with Kancey. Like I think they want to see what it looks like with that. Yeah. And I know people are going to bring up Haason Reddick, and like you mentioned, there's a lot of people in the chat and everything talking about that. I personally, if I was running the team, I would make the phone call. But I'm not. It's Jason Light, and I don't know if they would. I don't know. One, I do think the Jets want to keep him. I think the Jets ultimately want to work something out. I don't think they want to get rid of him. But at the same time, that contract and everything, it's a weird situation, basically. And what shape is Haason Reddick going to be in? The longer this goes on, what shape is Haason Reddick going to be in? This is a guy who did not participate in training camp or the preseason and now hasn't participated in the season. So what are you exactly getting? I mean, I think he's a good player, but it's a little bit of cause for concern there, right? That, he's missed a lot of valuable time there.
Yeah, and then you have to imagine if the Bucs get desperate enough to make a move, he's going to come in and he's going to play right away. And in that situation, who is he taking snaps away from? Taking snaps away from a Chris Braswell. Taking snaps away from an Anthony Nelson, who they already paid. And I know that you know what you have in Anthony Nelson, but wanted to highlight more Chris Braswell. We cannot forget his presence in that outside linebacker room. Hasn't done a ton yet, but just like we talked about with Yaya Diaby, maybe it takes these guys a couple of weeks to get warmed up. I mean, it is not unheard of to think about a defensive lineman gaining momentum as the season goes on. And when you take those reps away, especially from these young pass rushers that the Bucs wanted to develop, that was a big point going into this year, is that the Bucs are trusting all of this young talent on the defensive line. Clearly, they are investing time to see these guys blossom, develop, or ultimately turn into something that they can make a decision on here.
Yeah, you're right. Braswell is somebody they want to be part of their future, right? They want Diaby to be part of their future. And if you require Haason Reddick, okay, I mean, you get deeper at that position. That's an important position to get deeper at, but you're taking snaps away from somebody, whether it's JTS, who I know a lot of people were out on, but he's played well the first 2 weeks. Whether it's Chris Braswell, a rookie who, those reps are going to be valuable, or Anthony Nelson, or even Yaya Diaby himself, maybe. So you're going to be taking reps away from somebody. And like I said, I would call, I would call the Jets and see what it would take. Obviously, we don't know exactly what Reddick is asking for. So if the listeners do not know, the situation is the Eagles had Haason Reddick. Haason Reddick won a new contract. The Eagles did not want to pay that contract. The Eagles then trade him to the New York Jets, and the understanding is that he's going to get a new contract from the New York Jets. The issue is that has not happened yet, so Haason Reddick has not reported to the Jets. And now there's some talk that maybe he could be on the move again to somebody who would pay him. And I don't know exactly what his contract demands are. I do get it, right, that he wants a new contract. I do think he's underpaid with what pass rushers are making nowadays. So, I mean, like I said, if it was up to me, I would call. I would make the phone call. I just don't think they will. I would see, if the price is a fourth round pick that can turn into a potential third if the Bucs make like the NFC title game or something, I would be fine with that. I wouldn't have an issue with that. I think the bigger deal, and I don't think the Bucs would necessarily have an issue with that. I think the bigger deal is the contract extension. The money that's going to be coming in. The Bucs have paid a lot of guys. And it's going to start to run out here soon. And I know people are mentioning, well, they have this cap space. You got to think of what they have coming up as well. Chris Godwin's looked fantastic. Do you want to lose Chris Godwin? Because that may be the difference there.
Yeah, Chris Godwin has been the best offensive player on the field outside of the quarterback position for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this season. He is the leading receiver 2 weeks in a row here. It's a contract year for Chris Godwin. I think the Bucs are already going to have a hard time trying to pay for him at the end of the year. But just like you mentioned, you're tossing other money to these resources, and it doesn't seem much right now. But when push comes to shove, you're going to wish you had that extra $10 million, when Chris Godwin gets a better option somewhere else.
Yeah, so it just, there's sacrifices to be made. The Bucs have paid Antoine Field Jr. They paid Tristan Wirfs. They paid Baker Mayfield. They paid Mike Evans. They've paid Vita Vea. They've paid these guys. Eventually you got to make some sacrifices. So I don't know exactly what Haason Reddick will be asking for. I would make the phone call, just inquire, but we'll see. I don't think there's anything imminent, and I don't think it's something that I'm necessarily expecting the Buccaneers to do. So I wouldn't be holding your breath, but we'll see. I think as time goes on, we'll get more answers about this pass rush for sure.
Yeah, a lot of opinions out there about Haason Reddick. A lot of people say that he's not good for the locker room, but I will leave you with this.
He wants to get paid, man. I don't see an issue with that.
Yeah, I don't either. But you see what happens to certain players. Devin White wanted to get paid, and he was a healthy scratch this week for Philly.
Yeah, well, Haason Reddick's good at football. That's the difference.
That's fair. But I will say this about the Haason Reddick situation. Does not seem like a Jason Light move.
No,
the standard and the culture, this and that we have talked about, the homegrown guys, the Bucs having some of the most homegrown talent in the NFL to fill out a roster. Jason Light has done that stuff for a reason, and I think bringing in Haason Reddick, making him a priority, paying him whatever it would be to get him through the year, and then ultimately letting him go, because I don't think the Bucs are going to invest in a pass rusher like that next year. I don't think that's the position.
That's the reason. It's going to take it's going to be a multi-year thing.
Right.
He's not going to take a 1-year deal.
Correct. It's going to be a lot of hassling, a lot of moving money around, and I don't think it matches the theme of what Jason Light has been doing, how he's been building this team, the personalities on this team. It doesn't feel like it would be a move that meshes very well. Seems like it would be another Deshaun Jackson signing, in my opinion. I think it would play out in a similar way to that. But we do have a good question here from our buddy Lee Ayers checking in chat. Before we get to the rest of the injury news, he says, "Great show, guys. What is the underlying reason for all of these injuries? Is it just bad luck, Evan?"
I do think it's a little bit of bad luck. It just, Vita Vea fell on, basically, hurts his knee. Antoine Field Jr., I think he goes to make a tackle and just something sort of, his ankle/foot just kind of gets hurt. Calijah Kancey, not really sure. It's just bad luck, bad timing. I wouldn't really say it's the strength staff, it's the conditioning staff. That's if Vita Vea, Antoine Field Jr., Calijah Kancey, and Luke Goedeke, if they all had hamstring injuries and soft tissue stuff, right? Stuff that is easily preventable, then maybe you could be like, man, are these guys conditioned well enough or this and that?
And we've been there before. I think it was 2018, 2019. Mike Evans, his year finishes with a hamstring injury, and he was one of several guys who missed some time that year with either hamstring or soft tissue stuff like that. That has already been an issue in the past before with the Bucs.
It has been an issue, but it's just these types of injuries are more so like, yeah, it's kind of crap timing, like it's just kind of, piling up and you just hope that there's no more, right? Because you can only take so much more, right? Like, okay, they survived without Antoine Winfield Jr. in Detroit. They survived basically the second half in Detroit without Vita Vea. But if those guys are going to miss some time, you really, like, especially on the defensive side of the ball, you can't have many, if any, more injuries to any of your starters. I mean, it is already going to be tough sledding if these guys have to miss extended time, which hopefully isn't the case. It doesn't seem like it is the case, but you never know with these things. Setbacks happens all the time. But I mean, yeah, Luke Goedeke comes up, with concussion symptoms. It's just, I do think it's just sort of bad luck, and it is bad timing. It so happens to be early in the year. Hopefully that means by the end of the year, these guys are healthy enough and they're not, completely banged up, because they were able to, they basically got their injury out of the way now and they're getting their rest now pretty much. So hopefully this means the injury bug hits the Bucs early in the year and not later in the year when it comes to playing important football, in December and January.
Carrying on with the injury topic here, we have not gotten an official update on right tackle Luke Goedeke. We'll probably get one tomorrow when the Bucs are back in the facility. But Evan, assuming everything goes according to plan, he's expected to be cleared at some point this week and should be back in the lineup for the Bucs against Denver this Sunday. So Luke
They
Goedeke,
need him.
I know we've talked a ton about these defensive guys and they stepped up, but I mean, to avoid any pass rusher getting 4 sacks in the first quarter, I think you're going to need Luke Goedeke out there.
Yeah, they need him. And I think Luke Goedeke is solid, right? I think he's a solid right tackle. I don't know if he's good.
Improved.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, probably last year was probably the most improved player they had. I would think. But I mean, yeah, they definitely missed him out there. And the Broncos defense has actually been decent throughout like the season so far. I mean, gave up 26 to Seattle. Seattle got I believe, but no, it was Denver that got the safeties. But Seattle's offense isn't great, but I mean, scoring 26 points. Then Steelers, and I know the Steelers' offense isn't great, but they limited them to 13 points. So, yeah, it's something to where hopefully, we'll find out as the week goes on, but hopefully he can clear concussion protocol and be out there because, they're going to need him. They are going to need him. I believe I actually saw a stat today that so the Buccaneers lead. This is going to be interesting because the Buccaneers offense leads the NFL in explosive plays. The Broncos defense leads the NFL in limiting explosive plays through the first 2 games. So that's going to be an interesting matchup there. And yeah, hopefully Luke Goedeke can be back 100% for that game on Sunday.
Yeah, we'll dive into a lot more of it on the game preview this week, but potentially this is the game the Bucs get the run game going, right? I mean, I know Baker's been an absolute stud.
Yeah, they're not good at defending the run.
Yeah, I mean, Baker's been an absolute stud, but you may not be able to throw the football as effectively as you did in the first 2 weeks of the season. So if that is the case, we'll dive into it more later this week, but maybe Rachaad White and Bucky Irving are going to get some more carries this week. So set your fantasy lineups accordingly. Now,
pay attention to betting the Bucs. Might have some props for that.
There you go. Maybe. Let's take a trip around the NFC South as we wrap up today's midweek show. Monday Night Football. The Falcons and the Eagles. This was a finish. 22.
It was looking like the Falcons were going to be 0-2.
Yeah,
That's what it was looking like.
It wasn't looking great. The Falcons able to drive down the field and score. They left a little too much time on the clock for Philly to drive down the field and score. And then they got it back with under a minute to go.
Yeah, after Saquon Barkley drops the ball on 3rd down and the clock stops, the Eagles kick the field goal.
Yeah.
To go up 6. Then they get it with I think it was like a little, might have been a little over a minute, but they didn't have any timeouts. So it was like a minute 12 and no timeouts.
Primetime Kirk, Monday Night Football, drives the Falcons down the field, and they win with a game-winning touchdown. I think it was 3 or 4 big plays, a couple of big-time completions by Darnell Mooney, put him in scoring position. But Kirk, 20 for 29, 241 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Just a week after week 1 where this team looked all kinds of unorganized and not on the same page against a bad Steelers offense, they pull off a very stunning win on Monday Night Football in a tough game in a tough place to play on the road. So obviously Falcons fans are happy, but what do you make of that performance for Atlanta? How they looking so far?
I don't think they're that good. Like I really, to me, that was more of the Eagles blowing that game than the Falcons winning it. Like,
Agreed.
They couldn't even touch Kirk. Like Kirk can't move. He literally, and maybe this gets better as the season goes on, right? Maybe because I think Troy Aikman had even mentioned during the broadcast that like Kirk said, he's not 100% healthy yet. Like he can't move in the pocket, and the Eagles pass rush just could not get there. So I'm not really concerned about the Falcons. They have the Chiefs this week. They're probably going to lose. Like I'm not really concerned. But we did want to touch on the Falcons today because in our post game show Sunday, we weren't able to talk about the Falcons and we did the sort of the division recap thing. So the Falcons avoid 0-2. 0-2 is basically the kiss of death for a lot of teams. If you're hoping to make the playoffs, 0-2 is, done basically. And, they really were able to avoid, like I said, avoid a tough start because you could have been staring 0-3 right in the face. We're staring right down the barrel of 0-3 with Kansas City coming up. So, yeah, the Eagles, I think the Eagles blew that one. So I'm not really too impressed by Atlanta. I really am not. But besides the Atlanta Falcons, we do have some other news that's off the field, kind of, but affects on the field as Dave Canales, old friend Dave Canales, makes an important decision, probably the biggest decision. And I mean, look, I'm sure the owner, David Tepper, had a hand in this as well. But Dave Canales has made the decision to bench Bryce Young, who was the number 1 overall draft pick in 2023 after an 0-2 start and just a dismal start to their season for the Carolina offense. Bryce Young is now headed to the bench. Andy Dalton is going to be the Panther starter. So what do you make of that? And, do you think it's just, I mean, look, I think Dalton, the sad thing is I think Dalton gives them a better chance to win, right? And I think at this point, because Canales isn't concerned about a draft pick right now. He's trying to win football games because he's trying to keep his job. Not saying the Panthers are going to fire him after one season, but, he's just trying to do the best he can. And right now, Bryce Young is looking like an all-time bust.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. He looks like he needs to be in the UFL. And I think that trading away the resources that they did, going all in the way that they did to acquire that number 1 overall pick is going to add to the reason that Bryce Young could be one of the bigger busts in recent history. I mean, maybe NFL history. Now, a lot of people are going to say that, like, yes, he's playing on the worst team in the NFL. And if you give this kid a chance on 31 other teams, he probably does marginally better. But regardless, the time has come. And when you're Dave Canales, it's about winning football games. Now, Coach Dave, a couple of days prior, I think the same day that he benched Tua, he was up there at the podium saying, not Tua, Bryce Young. He was up there at the podium saying Bryce Young is our quarterback.
It was the post game show. He said it was the post game press conference said Bryce Young is our quarterback.
Yeah.
And
then, good old Dave has a track record of being honest with his family and everybody else. So we can always take his word when he says things like that. Clearly. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Carolina because if Andy Dalton can come in and just magically make things work, then I think a lot of bad things can be said about Bryce Young. But also important to mention, I know people are upset with Canales about the Bryce Young thing, but I feel like it should matter to more people that Canales didn't draft Bryce Young.
Okay.
That regime, that's not really their quarterback. And again, I know Bryce Young kind of getting the shit out of the stick here, but I mean, what choice are you left with?
Dude, I mean, I think they probably should have just let it ride just because you have a lot, riding on him.
Yeah,
but
right.
Dude, those first 2 games were this is worse than what he was last year. So it is definitely something that just like I said, we're talking about it because it's division news, and me and you were actually talking about it beforehand. The Bucs don't play the Panthers for a long time, so it's not like it's coming up anytime soon. They play the Panthers for the first time this season, December 1st. So you got a little bit of time before the Buccaneers play the Carolina Panthers. But it's division news, and it is something that have to keep an eye on how the Panthers play now. Maybe I do think they might get a little bit of energy, right? A little bit of juice with a new quarter, new lease on life. Basically, some of those guys may feel right. Okay, here's a fresh start. But we'll see how things go in the chat. How I feel about Kyle Trask news. Okay, so there really isn't any Kyle Trask news. We'll address this really quick. This is what I believe Bucs Rays Bolts is alluding to here is the Carolina radio. A lot of Carolina sports stations are discussing options at quarterback. And they're noting that Dave Canales was the Buccaneers offensive coordinator for last year. And they're wondering if the Panthers could swing a trade for Kyle Trask to see what Trask has. Just going to say it's not likely. The Buccaneers, they like to have Trask as their backup. At most, you're getting a 6th round pick, maybe, for him. Like, is that really worth it? And also, for the Panthers, I mean, you're going to trade for a guy, have him learn the entire playbook during the season, all while he's a free agent at the end of this year anyway. I just don't really see that as happening. I think, that's sort of the radio stations sort of making talking points and trying to get people, talking and just pointing an obvious connection there, right? Because there is a connection, but would be pretty surprised if that ended up happening.
Yeah, and let's not forget that John Wolford no longer a quarterback option for the Bucs in Tampa Bay. So outside of Kyle Trask, if Baker Mayfield goes down,
it's Michael Pratt.
Yeah, I'm sure that Kyle Trask having that much, 4 years of preseason experience is going to help him a little bit. Does have some regular season snaps under his belt as well. But I just think unless you're finding value in the picks that are offered to you and it's a trade that you cannot refuse, if Baker goes down,
That's the thing, yeah.
I mean, if Baker goes down, season's over. But
if he goes down for an extended period of time, yeah, it's done.
But with Kyle Trask, I feel like if Baker goes down with an extended period of time, you got like a 70-30 chance that 70% it doesn't work out, season's over. 30%, the guy who's been sitting on the bench for all these years is actually a viable quarterback in the NFL, and that's why you kept him on the roster. So, like, there's a chance, but there's a lot that you gotta hope goes right for that 30% to come to fruition. And him not being on the roster at all for Tampa Bay does not seem like a viable option. I hope Baker doesn't miss any time. He shouldn't miss any time, but he has shown us he's not afraid to put his body on the line.
Yeah,
so
and he's had seasons where he's been hurt. Like he's had seasons where he's been hurt. He got banged up a few times last season. He just didn't miss any time. So it's a talking point for the radio stations. Don't really think there is any Kyle Trask news per se. The Panthers benching Bryce Young, Falcons avoid 0-2, and the Bucs themselves are still 2-0. So that's really all that matters here, though, right? The Bucs being 2-0 and hoping to go to 3-0. 3-0 for the first time since 2005. So, and also something that actually I think I was laying in bed last night thinking about. So the Bucs have actually, and this has nothing to do with maybe like week 2 or anything. It's has to do with week 1. The Bucs have actually fared very well in week 1 games. I believe since 2016, They are 7-2 in week 1 games. Those 2 losses being 2019 and 2020. So pretty good. They usually get off to pretty quick starts. So hopefully they can get off to a quick start against the Broncos and be on their way to 3-0 for the first time in almost 20 years.
Yeah, talking about the New Orleans Saints very quickly here, it is important to note that all of these points they are scoring here over the first 2 weeks of the season. 2024, they scored 91 points in 2 games, which is the most in NFL history. Most in NFL history behind the 2009 Saints, who scored 93 points in the first 2 games and ended up winning the Super Bowl that season. Clint Kubiak has really done a nice job in these first 2 weeks with this New Orleans offense. I mean, Derek Carr is looking like a starting quarterback in the NFL again. And we were asking ourselves after that week 2 game had wrapped up, the Bucs had just beat the Lions, but we couldn't help but notice New Orleans beat the dog crap out of Dallas. The fashion that they did it, the cohesive level of football they're playing on the offensive side. You know, the Saints have not scored under 44 points since Jameis Winston went rogue and called that fake quarterback kneel in that last week of the season against Atlanta. So, I mean, Jameis might be the savior of the New Orleans offense here, but I got to say Clint Kubiak doing a really good job too.
Yeah, no, he is, and it's been an impressive offensive showing. The one thing I will say, excuse me. So they played the Panthers, right? The Panthers have scored 13 total points this whole season. Just benched their number 1 overall pick. And then they play the Cowboys. We've seen the Saints do this before, though. Okay,
Right.
Week 1 of 2021, they beat the Green Bay Packers 38-3. The Saints went 9-8 that year and missed the playoffs. So, and I'm not saying that it's impressive. It is. I'm not saying it's not impressive. It's very impressive. They're 2-0 start just with the Buccaneers, but I wait and see basically. And they got, Philly's coming into town now. Philly's gonna be, I'm sure, not too pleased, and the Saints are at home, so that'll be an interesting game to watch.
Let me ask you one more question as we wrap up here, and this has to do with the Buccaneers quarterback, Baker Mayfield. We've talked a lot about quarterbacks on today's show, and I want to get your 2 cents on Baker because, Evan, there is a section of our fan base, they just feel like you're not giving them enough. And by them, I mean both the audience and Baker Mayfield. There's a lot of people who feel like Baker Mayfield has played like a freak these first 2 weeks of the season for the Bucs, and some people maybe think that you haven't properly given him his flowers yet. Is that true? Is he turning a page for you? Are you officially a believer in Baker Mayfield? Because this time last year, you were not, my friend.
Yeah, I don't know what else I really need to say. I mean, I come on week 1, I say he was fantastic. I come on week 2, I said he wasn't, just because I said he wasn't Superman, like that's me, not praising him enough. I guess I don't know. He's been really, really, really good for them, and he's been everything they've asked for. From last year signing a 1-year, $4 million deal to this year, he's living up to that extension. Hopefully he can keep it up. That's what the hope is for a full 17 games. I think, the more you're watching him, the more he's proven that he probably can, he looks comfortable in the Liam Cohen offense. He's got the weapons to do it. So I have no reason to believe he can't. I don't know what people want me to say. I think it's, again, I think it's sort of something where people think, basically just people hold past comments against me, and they don't realize that I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't really tell the future. So they're like, oh, but this happened, so you gotta change your opinion. Oh, I will change my opinion because it happened. I didn't know it was gonna happen. And also the funny thing is people think like you get like enjoyment from seeing the Bucs lose or anything.
That's another topic in itself. I'd like to squash this bug right now. For anyone who thinks otherwise, I don't know why people assume this is the way that it is, but when I pick the Bucs to lose, when Evan picks I had to look at the camera. When Evan picks the Bucs to lose, it's not because we want them to lose. Like, we don't pick the Bucs to lose and say, "Oh, I fucking hope they lose this week." So my prediction.
And then, we don't come on and say, "Oh man, they won."
We have never, ever wanted to get on this podcast and lie to you, deceive you, say something and mean another. Since day one, we have said what we mean and mean what we say on this very podcast. And just like Evan said, things have happened sometimes that change opinions, and that's fine. That's the beauty of why we do this, right? Yeah, it's the beauty of sports. It's the beauty of broadcasting. It's why we do all of this. But holy shit, people think we pick the Bucs to lose because we want them to lose. We don't need you. You don't believe in this team. Give me a fucking break. Kiss my ass.
Well, and also, I mean, like people act like we picked them to lose against Washington too.
Dude,
like we both picked them to win. Like,
seriously,
and the funny thing is, if the Bucs would have lost to the Lions, right? You wouldn't have seen anybody come in and praise us for being right.
No,
they wouldn't have said anything. So it is weird, but look, we're not going to change. I mean, if there's a game where if there's a game where me and Rhett think they're going to lose, or Rhett thinks they're going to lose, or I think they're going to lose, we're going to pick them to lose. And that's not. I can tell you right now, it's not the case this week. Okay, I do think they're going to win this game against the Broncos, but they're not gonna go 17-0. I hate to break it to you, but it's not going to happen.
Good on the other. There were a couple of shows that picked the Bucs to win last week, and those guys are going to bask in it all week. Good for them. That's great. That's why we play the game. But yeah, like we're always gonna tell you what we think is gonna happen, or in our personal opinion, what we think is gonna happen. Like
That's why you listen. That's why you listen.
We want to try and give you the most level-headed information we can. I don't know. I didn't even mean to get that worked up. It makes me laugh and it makes me upset at the same time. But it's the price you pay to be the boss, I guess. The cost to be the boss. Yeah. Pay the cost to be the boss. Evan, I think we have covered all of our topics for today's midweek show of the Cannon Fire Podcast. Is there anything that I am missing here?
Don't believe so. Did a pretty good job of covering everything, and we'll have to keep an eye on the injury report. As for YouTube content this week, stay tuned for the latest episode of Betting the Bucs. That is the next thing that will come out as far as short video content. And then also, the players to watch will be out Saturday after the preview show on Friday, and then stay tuned for the post-game show after the Broncos game.
Should be a good one. Got some special guests and more exclusive content coming for you guys this week. Head over to the YouTube channel at Cannon Fire Podcast. Thank you to everybody for hanging out with us live today. Really big crowd for a midweek show. Didn't expect this. We kind of popped up, a surprise pop-up show, but damn near 100 people in here. So thank you guys. Noah 2023, Bucs Rays Bolts, Bat W, Christopher Cole, and our buddy, New Orleans Saints fan Turbo Duran checking in. He's been watching us a lot this season. So it never hurts to get an outside perspective, and we appreciate all the insight and all the support that we can get. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. Follow the show on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show. And, of course, Tampa Bay Buccaneer news as it happens. Speaking of Bucs news as it happens, you can follow my co-host, Evan, on that side, at Bucs_Daily. You can also find him on Twitter, at EvanNFL, and check out his written work at BucsNation.com. What have you got this week?
So I had the day after reactions. Also going to have Q&A with the Broncos SB Nation site coming up. And then also my X Factor, which will tie into the players to watch as well. So I'm not going to tell you who the X Factor is. To find out the X Factor either later in the week, head to BucsNation.com, or later in the week, check out the video on Cannon Fire Podcast YouTube channel.
Awesome. Last but not least, you can find myself, Instagram and Twitter, at Reddikus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. Thank you, folks, once again for hanging out with us. We will talk to you later this week for the game preview show, getting you ready for the Buccaneers Week 3 matchup with the Denver Broncos. I'm your host, Rhett Matthew, signing off for my co-host, Evan Wanish. We will see you then. Until then, and as always, go Bucs.